Well, welcome back. It's been a few weeks. We've been busy chasing other things, but just wanted to get back together and touch on a couple very pertinent recent updates. Most importantly is the recent rate decisions, both in the U.S. and in Canada, and maybe we'll get to a couple other changes that have come down the pike that may or may not have a bigger impact as we go. So, Andrew, why don't you kick us off with what's recently happened with rates, and then we can sort of touch on where we think things are going. Mike's losing it because I'm in the jungle here.
No,
So
I'm laughing because Kyle is like right to business. I think we have to talk about the burning topic that everyone wants to know. Where is Kyle? Andrew and I are freaking in our urban jungles, and Kyle doesn't have a background on.
no,
This is not a Google background, a Google Meet background. He's in the
no,
bush.
this is the way it should be ideally. No, just outside of Calgary, like probably one of the biggest reasons people live in Calgary is you can get out to the mountains quite quickly, and there's no cell reception, so good old Starlink has come through. But yeah, no, it's a cool backdrop. We should all have this backdrop, I think.
Yeah, we should. I guess we got to get mountain bikes first.
No,
I
get
have
over
one.
a hike.
I gotta get in shape to get on that mountain bike in the first place.
Yeah,
Rick, that looks unreal. That looks unreal where you are. Can you give us a quick 360 or is it going to
sure.
mess up your setup?
No, it's
Look at
a
that.
little.
Look at that.
Nice to do a podcast in the middle of the forest there.
It's
Wow.
true. There's the parking lot. You can see that behind the trees. So
So Kyle
yeah,
has all his gear. He's going to do this podcast, and right after he gets to the podcast, he's going to link up with one of his mates, and they're going to jump on the bikes and go into the trail in the
yeah,
mountains of Alberta, Calgary.
yeah. Hit the trail. Yeah, that's the desire is to try and balance a little work-life balance if you can. So yeah, definitely.
Do you encounter a lot of elevation there? Like, are you close to the like Banff area?
Yeah, so Banff is a little bit further away from here. So Banff is roughly about 2 hours from Calgary. But you start to hit elevations like the foothills within, like I say, like I'm about 45 minutes outside of Calgary, and you start to hit elevation right away. Not huge inclines, like you can find. There's not going to be mountains, but you can find some pretty big elevation changes if you wanted. There's some pretty good hikes as well. So there's some quasi peaks out here as well. Big area is obviously Kananaskis, so that's still in the province. It's a provincial park before you get to the federal park. But yeah, like there's tons of stuff. Essentially, the entire west side of the province of Alberta is all mountains. Like there's hundreds and hundreds of kilometers worth of mountains. So
And you have,
we're spoiled, that's for sure. There's lots out here.
and you have Danielle Smith.
Yeah, yeah. Depending on your view on the Republic, I think she's taken a lot of heat from some of the separatist side because it doesn't seem like she's that keen on it. So it's one of those things, right? It's like you can't do all things for all people. Like I think it's really fascinating to see that. Well, I think I
I think Kyle
Yeah,
spoke
we
too soon.
lost
I
you,
think I
Kyle. Your
lost you guys.
Starlink,
That's kind of funny.
just your satellite in the sky just
Elon,
got
let's go.
intercepted.
Get it together, bud.
got intercepted as he's talking about separatists.
But he's back. He's back.
I was just saying, like, yeah, we were talking it up so much, and now it's gonna fall out. But it seems like it's back okay.
No
I'm
pressure,
getting,
Elon. No pressure.
yeah, I was gonna say, Elon, it's about 92% ping success, so that's pretty good. It'll probably drop in and out, but the benefit of this software is it's gonna record natively and on the local machine. So anyone listening, it's not gonna be interrupted, but we're
Are you
we're
gonna
gonna
do a
probably
product?
see some lag.
Are
What's
you gonna
that?
do a product placement right now for the software you use? Is this a paid product placement?
No, no, no. We use Riverside, so that's one of the benefits. But yeah, it's good and bad, you know.
And if you want to use Riverside, you can use our referral code, which is
Yeah,
the
exactly.
founders. Just use the code Founders Podcast.
Yeah,
Kyle, we
no,
may need
we
a
don't
second.
have we don't have an affiliate link
We'll get one.
for obvious reasons. So,
We'll get one.
but
Awesome.
anyways, yes, Andrew, what do you think? What's going on? What's the environment? What should people look out for?
So, as you've known, heard from the U.S., the unemployment rate has gone up. So that triggered the Fed to essentially cut rates by quarter percent basis point. So, um, and that's has now really triggered a rally in the market. But like Kyle's mentioned earlier, it's the market is booming and is going wild, but everywhere else is just lagging. is struggling, right? We're talking about high unemployment. Cost of living is extremely high. So, so I guess my question for you guys do you anticipate more rates cuts coming? And if they're anticipating more rates cuts coming, what is your opinion on the outlook? Are we heading into recession? Now, and you look at Canada, okay, and taking it back onto the Canadian side, Canada also decreased rates as well. Um, and do you think we are going into a recession?
$1 million question. So from a Canadian standpoint, let's look at some of the numbers first before we dive into that. What's our policy? I think the policy rate's at 2.5% in Canada right now, Bank of Canada policy rate.
Let me
I
see.
believe it's 2.5. And how about inflation? Can we pull up like what inflation's at? Last it was like around 2, I thought, or just under 2.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so I think bank rate's 2.5, and the inflation rate is like 1.8, 1.9.
Yeah, 1.8, 1.9. Okay. But there's talk about the inflation holding at around 2.5, but inflation's at 1.9, so I'm not sure where they're getting that from. Unemployment's at 7.1%.
It's pretty high.
Yeah, and youth unemployment, just quickly to interject, youth unemployment's like almost over 10%. It's like double digits. It's high.
So
So these are all kind of indicators of where the economy is going, like looking at some of
So
the
the last
what are some other indicators we could look at?
So I think we've seen, okay, this year, just to kind of give everybody background, this year we saw three rate cuts so far. All right, one in January, 25 basis point, and then another one in March, also another 25 basis point, and then recently, September 17, another 25 basis point. So we saw three rate cuts this year. They've held for the majority of the year. So where are we going from here? Like, are we anticipating a recession coming? Is that why the Bank of Canada is reacting and why the Fed is also reacting on the US front? What do you guys think?
So I guess I'll jump in. Like, one thing I just checked was youth unemployment is actually 15%. So it's significant. And I think the signals that both Feds are looking at is more than just inflation. I think the US specifically, it's not as clear in Canada, but definitely in the US, there's a lot of talk around unemployment. And one of the goals of the Fed, the Federal Reserve, is to maximize employment. So it's not just inflation or pricing. It's actually, trying to maximize employment and keep people employed and keep as much growth in the economy as possible. So I don't know. I find it really fascinating because I think the markets are on a tear, partially because people think that the lower rate environment is better for growth, but I agree with also the sentiment that, like, where is that growth going to come from? Like, companies are going to have to start borrowing in order to hire to correct that unemployment trajectory, and then people are going to have to start spending. And I think we've seen a decrease in spending and consumer confidence over the last year as well. Inventories are piling up. People are buying less. People are selling. Businesses are selling less. Inflation, again, prices have stayed quite high, so that doesn't help consumer spending either. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not entirely personally sold on the credit, growth trajectory story, where if credit gets really cheap again, suddenly it's going to fix all of our ills. I just don't see it. I think I might have lost you guys again.
Lost
So
Kyle to the bush
we'll
again.
give it a sec here.
Well, Mike, why don't you give your take on it? Do you think we are going into recession, or what do you think?
Well, there's there Kyle's back, but I was going to say there's well, I want to answer that, but first Kyle, you cut off right when you were giving your final verdict.
Yeah, sorry. I'm a little perplexed. I'm not sold on the credit story being a big, fix all. I don't think that cheaper rates, lower rates and cheaper credit is suddenly going to, overnight lead to a bunch of employment and a bunch of consumer spending.
I agree. And I think the spending, Kyle mentioned spending, that's really critical. I find like people are spending less in general. And it really depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to some people that are a little bit more wealthy, they're still spending. They're spending money on the personal side, But if you talk to the average household, they've really cut down on the spending. And some of the wealthy individuals, a lot of this comes down to consumer sentiment. And if like you are in the camp where you believe a recession is coming, you're naturally going to slow down your spending and sit on cash. And when that happens, that has a trickle effect on what's happening in the economy, because you have these individuals that are typically deploying capital starting to become more conservative with that capital in fear of a looming recession, and they're not spending money, and the inflation isn't helping because the costs of things continue to rise. Money isn't being reinjected back into the market. So fear feeds a lot of this. If the fear continues, I think we will go into a recession next year. I think 2026 is going to be a rough year in general, but I could be wrong, because then you hear about optimists who are they're still spending, or in their respective industries, they're seeing their industries boom. But most of the business owners I'm talking to have seen a pullback in terms of revenues, in terms of employment. They've seen a downswing. So I believe that will amount to an eventual recession if it continues. But who knows? It depends who you talk to. It's hard to say. Me too. I can't really put my finger on it. I think it's going to be a rough year, but for how long? And what is it defined as a recession? What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I think it really comes down on that unemployment, and in Canada, we're seeing a couple of different impacts here. I think we're seeing the housing market being severely impacted over this past year. So the question then becomes is like Hal's saying, is dropping rates going to really stimulate that market, which is a big part of the Canadian economy? I personally don't think so, because I think there's a lot more issues around why the housing market is just dropping the way it is, and it's not just rates, right? Because typically, you wouldn't see this kind of impact where rates are where it is, and we're still continuously seeing prices for homes dropping. So if this is the case, that means just, there's little jobs. There's very little jobs being created in the economy. That's why we have a higher unemployment rate, and that, I think, is going to cause a bigger problem and could lead into some sort of recession for us next year, especially in Canada.
So, Andrew, why don't you feel like a lower rate environment would spur that sort of real estate spending that we're used to?
Because there's no jobs, first of all, and the demand it seems like, if basically the government over the past couple of years has always been saying, and they've been selling the idea that there's a housing shortage, right? And if there is a housing shortage, like they say, out of 2.5% rate, you should see prices stabilizing, right? And supply to be to dwindle a little bit, but that's not happening. Supply is constantly being added, and so I think it's more systemic like issue that's happening in the system right now, where the market is just not seeing these homes as an appreciating asset anymore, and there's no demand for it. So my question is, what happened to that demand?
Yeah, no, it is strange because the home starts have slowed down as well. Like where Andrew's talking about, existing inventory and new inventory. But if you look at new inventory, there's very little new inventory coming to market. So, given the fact that such little inventory is coming to market, immigration is where it's at. I don't know what the new government has done with their immigration caps, but it was historically half a billion dollars, half a billion people coming into the country per year for the last few years, or roughly around that. So if there's that many people, where are these people living? The
Not half a
homes are
billion,
being built.
half a million. So like 500,000. I think it's over. I think it's actually over a million. I think it's up to 2 million peak
Half a
over the
million,
last
yes.
couple of years. Yeah.
Yes, half a million. Sorry, about 500,000. But yeah, the last few years was higher. You're right, under the last government we had, but it was historically about half a million for per year. So where are these individuals living or buying homes? If Andrew's saying that and it's true, like here we see a lot of supply on the markets. If there was less supply, there would definitely be more demand, basic economics. But houses are sitting on the market; they're going for record lows. Obviously, there's not enough demand for the supply. Why is that?
What are you guys seeing as well in the Toronto market with the condo space? Because I think it's kind of disingenuous to say like, well, the whole housing market suffering in this way or that way. Like, I definitely have heard, and we've seen locally here, that there's a huge split between single family and condos. So like, there's a lot of demand. I shouldn't say a lot. There's consistently high demand for single family homes, detached homes, and there's consistently lower in recent years, low demand for condos. And yet, condos typically have been the highest amount of production, the most supply in this region. But you guys in Ontario have a lot of foreign investment. You've got a lot of rules that have changed recently. What are you guys seeing?
Oh, the condo demand has fallen off a cliff. And exactly the reason why you said, foreign investment, that it was a haven for foreign investors to buy these condos as investment properties. And now, I guess, given the environment, given the economy, whatever the reason, they're not buying them anymore. They're not as lucrative. And also people aren't buying them to even live in, like the intended use occupancy. So we're definitely seeing a massive drop off in condos. How about on the single family homes, Andrew? I'm seeing
Well,
it slow
yeah,
down there as well.
yeah, it slows down across the board. I think the thing is, a condo's always been like kind of like that entry level, that entry into the market. And typically, if you see that drop a little bit, it's going to have an impact, trickle effect onto the detached homes, right? Single family homes. So it is slowing across the board. You need to make money in order to upgrade, right? And I think people are just not either making the upgrades or or they're buying these condos to flip. Like there was a huge market for assignments and things like that in the Toronto market where people are buying pre-construction contracts, like their options contract, and flipping them for profits. And now a lot of those people are getting burned for that. So when people are not making money, they're not going to pour that money back into real estate, which is probably you see that on the higher priced homes like single family homes. So they're sitting longer. Prices are dropping. So you're seeing homes typically, I think on average, staying for about like 2-3 months on the market at least, and prices are dropping month after month, and they're still not moving. So it's slow, and that could be because people are expecting further rate movements. I don't know if that's one of the factor at play here, but I think it's something a bit more than that at this point.
And do we think that again, like that lower rate? Because I think the market thinks that something will change with a lower rate, or as we're getting lower rates. But are we in consensus that we just don't think that if we were, let's say, 2% bank rate, so let's say you could get a mortgage, a 25, 30-year mortgage for 2.5 or 3, do we don't believe that is going to actually move the needle in terms of the demand side, just because there's just not enough jobs, there's not enough people making enough money, first of all, to get onto the ladder in the condo market, but secondly, to upgrade?
Yeah, I think it's even if the rates drop, it's not going to drop to the level it was at, during COVID, right? So I think a lot of people that have purchased homes and are underwater right now are probably, on those lower rates and now having to renew. So a lot of those individuals just can't afford to carry it anymore, even at this lower rates,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, you're gonna start seeing more sales in the market, and I think the supply is just gonna flood over the next couple of years,
So,
even if they lower rates.
so what needs to change? Huh, that's awesome. So what needs to change then? I guess that's what would you guys change to be able to bring the economy back to a point of fruition? Tough question.
Question, Mike. Mike,
There's
tough
a lot
question.
of
I wish
moving
I had a
parts.
crystal ball. I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you what can happen next, right? So, Kyle, it looks like you wanted to say something there, so I'm gonna let you start.
Or maybe some
So
low-hanging fruit. What are some areas you think that we can improve or we're weak on?
I think I'll take that bait, because I think it's a lot easier to look at what's something that is actually really scary that I don't think I've experienced before, and is going to have a direct impact medium to long term, and that is that youth unemployment rate. because I think we've talked about it briefly in the context of AI. So AI in the workplace is having a dramatic effect on companies, especially large enterprises, hiring graduates. So new people, first job out of, let's say, university or whatever. And they're just simply not hiring as many, or they're not hiring them at all, because those low level, relatively low unskilled jobs are oftentimes getting wrapped into AI projects. So I think there's that piece. There's also, again, companies are investing a lot less in development because they just don't have the capital, because potentially the rate environment and the revenue and all that kind of stuff. So that's leading to this youth unemployment issue. And I think it's pretty crazy. It's pretty critical. And some of the politicians locally, including the premier here, Danielle Smith, have actually done events where she sort of said, like, we need to do more to try and stimulate this youth employment rate, because it's going to have such a disastrous impact on these people throughout their lives. Because essentially, if you can't start your career, like if you can't get connected when you're in your early or mid 20s, chances are you're going to really struggle. You're not going to be able to develop as quickly or as fast as prior generations. And so you can anticipate, people that are potentially in their 30s or 40s, if you can't afford a house now, well, what's going to change if you're not employed for the first 5 or 10 years of your life? What jobs are you going to be taking? How much income you're going to be generating and stuff like that. So it could have a really disastrous impact. The other thing that's happening at the same time, which we have talked about on the pod, is we are going into this crazy demographic shift where 2/3 of the population are going to be retired. And so at the same time that we need a huge amount of highly productive, highly paid, high tax paying young people entering the workforce, we're seeing one of the worst transition periods in modern history. So we're not employing them, we're not training them, we're not giving them jobs. And then we're at the same time in 20 years, we're going to say, hey guys, you need to carry the economy, you need to carry our pension system, you need to carry all our liabilities. Like, it doesn't add up. So that's going to be I think it's going to be really scary, but it's not a good place for sure. And I wouldn't definitely want to be a 20-year-old right now. Like, my wife said this quite clearly recently, where she's like, if you're a 20-year-old and there's absolutely no way you can't get a job, there's no way you could ever be able to afford a home. You could probably barely afford like the necessities like a car to get around. Like, how is that going to change your outlook on life? Right? Like, how is that going to change you going forward? So like, that's a pretty crazy scenario.
Yeah, it seems like it's getting harder
I don't
for each generation.
I don't even want to be a 30-something-year-old in this environment, Kyle. So I can't imagine a 20-something-year-old.
It should be getting better. Like, if you think about it, each generation should have it better than the last. But you're right. We're continuing to find that more and more difficult. Like, I thought it was difficult. I'm going to be turning 40. Andrew's in his late 30s. Kyle, I think you're
40.
40 as well. Congrats. We thought it was much more difficult for us when we got into the market versus our parents, because of the cost of housing. When we got in, it was like, wow, well, mom and dad, you guys bought a house for 5 times your annual income, maybe not even 3 times your annual combined income. We're buying houses that are like 20, 30 times our annual income at the time. So we thought we had it bad. And the costs of everything else was so high, but now we're seeing that it's just gotten even worse. Because you're right, now at least when we were coming out of school, we can get a job. When I came out, and Andrew, we talked about this. Jobs weren't super abundant at the time, but they were available. You had to really compete to get a job. You had to really go hard on merits. You had to interview well, and then you could get a job. But now you're coming out of school and you don't have that opportunity. Like you're talking with the youth today, and the housing and the cost of living is skyrocketed. Not just housing, just the cost of living in general. It sounds like it's just keeps getting harder.
Yeah. So just to come back, I don't want to make this a doom session. Like, I think that the thing that we have to solve, I think that where we start is, we have to think longer term. And I think that does start with changing the mentality around, pursuing revenue at the expense of, the younger generations, and hiring people and trying to lean a little bit more into mentorship and giving those opportunities. And again, just trying to correct, like, it's going to be the default position for a lot of young people that I'm never going to get there, right? Like, all of the signal and all the signs point to me really not getting there. I think we as a society need to do a better job of sort of saying, like, you will get there. Like, you just need to try it and push hard. And like, if you don't try, you're never going to get there. You have to, we have to stay optimistic, and there's potentially things coming around the corner that we don't know. And AI, like, we've all agreed, like, yes, it poses some threats, but there's also a ton of opportunity. And most of the, young companies that are developing new ideas and new technologies are run by or supported by young people. And so they have a better perspective on, the real world and, the trade and stuff like that than a lot of older people. So, we need to inject that youth and that talent into the economy in some way.
Well, let's speak to that from the perspective of employers. Like, we can give the perspective as us being employers. I guess it really depends what industry you're in, but a lot of industries hiring the youth, a lot of times they shy away from it because of the expense of doing so. There's a lot of cost to ramp up that individual to a level of productivity where they're generating income or return or revenue for the organization. It's a kind of like an investment for the company, and a lot of companies are in a state right now where they're not prepared to make that investment, or maybe they'll make it on a small scale, but they're not going to make it on a large scale to bring in these youth because they need immediate return. So they're looking for individuals that can come to the table with the skill set. Now, that might be different for tech, because tech, you're getting some really impressive youth coming out of these programs that can hit the ground running. But in other industries, financial services, like financial services takes years to get up to the point where you have the technical expertise to be able to generate value for the organization and where they start to see a return. So I don't know, it depends what industry you're in, but some industries it's very costly to hire the youth, and I think employers are shying away from it.
Yeah, just add to it. I think it's, youth today, they're competing with a lot of, first of all, a lot of people. Like, we're with the immigration, there's people coming into the country, large layoffs that are happening within Canada. So a lot of talents that are out on the sideline right now, ready to jump back into the market. So you're competing with experienced individuals. You're competing with people from overseas. People that are just got to Canada. They're willing to work for a little bit less. There's just so much competition. And I remember thinking back in the financial crisis when I've essentially graduated. It was tough. I was competing with people for jobs at McDonald's, with a university degree, right? Like it's crazy because McDonald's was looking at people with university degree, and how can you compete? If you're a student that's just, wanting to work a summer job. So it's tough. And I think in this market it's even tougher because you're not only competing with all these factors and all these individuals, you're also competing with AI. So it's tough. And that's why we're probably seeing a lot of crime rates and things like that going up as well, because some of these youth, they don't know what to do, so they just get in with the wrong crowd and essentially have to find a way to make a living, right? So we're seeing a lot of different negatives that are coming out of this.
So what's the positive, Kyle? Turn it around for the positive. How can we fix this issue?
So I just want to add a little anecdote to something you said, which was the financial services example. And you and I were at a conference, I think probably about a year ago now, where one of the leaders on stage who runs a business said that he had stopped hiring and stopped training people entirely.
Yes.
And it took both of us aback because we were like, that seems really surprising, because you're essentially saying, hey, if I can't hire somebody that's experienced and seasoned, that I'm going to pay them more, but they're going to hit the ground running, I'm not going to hire at all. And his takeaway was that he had essentially tried it and it didn't work. And I would just challenge that mentality to say, like, if you've hired people and you haven't gotten what you wanted out of them, I think we need to sort of manage expectations a bit. And that includes, it's really easy to sort of say, like, young people are flaky and they don't work as hard and whatever. But that's kind of to be expected, right? Like, you're not going to get the 40-year-old experience and work ethic in somebody that's never worked before, or if they have, it's been like a part-time paper route or whatever. Like, a lot of these people, it's their first job ever. So I think we need to manage those expectations. Secondly, I vehemently disagree with the sentiment that you can't train as well as you can hire versus, hire experienced people. I think that there's a lot of businesses that do very, very well if you do set up a culture of let's hire young people and train them and stay with it. And if they don't like the job or they're not good at it, let's try and find something else or something similar. There's going to be people that are not successful, and that's, unfortunately, that's part of, any sort of group of people. But to just carte blanche right off anybody that's not experienced, I think it doesn't end like you're essentially going to run out of people eventually. And then you're back where you started, where you're essentially saying we need people, but we can't find them because we've essentially run out of experienced people, or the people that would consider working for us don't want to work with us. And therefore we're stuck.
Yeah, it is a funnel. You're right. Think of like a funnel. You have to bring the juniors in, or the youth, develop them, and then they replace the aging demographic, right? So the banks have been notorious for doing this sort of thing. Like, think of the big banks. They hire young, they groom them, they put them through the branches, move them to corporate head office, and then they just keep doing it. It's like a machine that churns. But I think for smaller organizations, they don't have the resources to do that. Large organizations maybe, but some smaller organizations, especially when they're going through financial hardship, they may be struggling to deploy the resources to develop these young individuals. It's very resource intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add, in terms of the pipeline, like,
I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, no, and I think it's fair, right? Like, and to be totally honest, like, there's going to be businesses out there that they just don't have the bandwidth. Like, you just can't, like, I would imagine, some small mom and pop restaurants where the owners are, working the counter or whatever. Like, you just don't have the bandwidth to be watching and monitoring and training and doing everything plus the job that you're already doing. So it's not going to apply to everybody equally, but there are going to be enterprises, especially in the services, white collar services industries, where, it's one thing to sort of say like, I can and can't accommodate this, but it's another to sort of say like, hey, I'm just not getting the performance that I want for the dollar. I'm just going to totally abandon it entirely. And, unfortunately, we're seeing the same thing in the AI space. Like, one of my co-founders came from the consulting space in the US, and he said that's what every large enterprise is doing, is they're just gutting the bottom ranks, and they're trying to replace it. Any sort of outsourcing that's already taken place. So if they've got, customer service reps in, the Philippines or Poland or Thailand, whatever, those people are also losing their jobs. And so, what's that going to do to the local economy there? So it's definitely an issue, but I do think the solution to it is to have the conversation and say, hey guys, like, let's not cut off our nose to spite our face type of thing. Like, we need to support the younger generations for the economy, for ourselves, right? Like, we can be selfish here and say, like, we can't just ignore that people exist and like young people aren't getting on that ladder.
You're right. You're right.
So,
There has to. So yeah, you're right.
yeah, no, I'd say it starts essentially at the economy, right? Like, I think, the economy has to improve. Canada, okay, first of all, the US has the Mag 7, large company, sovereign funds, pouring money into these Mag 7. The Mag 7 is probably carrying a lot of a lot of those money that's flowing into the US. And, Canada used to have RIMS, we used to have Nortel, now we have Shopify, but that's it. Like, and it's interesting. I did some research on some of the positions out of Shopify. The salary is significantly lower than what they are in the U.S. from the Mag 7. So how are we supposed to compete for talent? Like, the economy is just, we're not incentivizing businesses to start up. Businesses are actually constantly under pressure. We're seeing minimum wage going up constantly. Like, this goes back to one of my biggest concern about rising minimum wage. Is that, an individual, let's say an older or younger individual, could have gone in and taken in a position at a lower pay so that they can learn the trade, they can learn the business, and slowly get their foot in the door. But now that threshold is so high for a company, like a small business, to hire somebody, they got to make better hiring decisions. They got to hire for someone that can do 2-3 jobs as opposed to just that one job. Like, I'll bring it up, the one job, was it Walmart, the Walmart greeter job. That job disappeared. It used to be somebody there greeting you when you walk in. It's a minimum wage job that gives people work, but that job disappeared, right? And it's
I,
I
I
think
think the other thing is that we don't talk about enough is that there is a threshold for automation. Like we see that in fast food. Like I haven't been to McDonald's in forever, but like that was a big deal when they brought in that automation, those screens and stuff like that, and it displaces jobs, right? And the point is, I think you're trying to get to, which I agree with, is the higher you want to make that cost of labor, the more attractive those
Mhm.
levels of automation become, or the more achievable. Because if you're paying somebody, the equivalent of $20 an hour, and that technology costs you $18 an hour, or the equivalent of it, like it's a
Mhm.
no-brainer.
Exactly, exactly. That's I think it's forcing companies to invest in automation, invest in technology to essentially scrap those jobs because it's so expensive and there's a lot of risk in hiring. Um,
There's
and
there's a lot of there's a lot of forces at play, and automation. I know what you're saying, Kyle. Usually, you get more leverage if you replace higher paid jobs. However, automation it starts at replacing usually the low paying jobs like the greeters Andrew talked about and the clerks at McDonald's. Well, their pay might be a little bit higher because of what minimum wage is, but I'm just saying on the spectrum they're usually on the lower end of earners, and automation's replacing a lot of those jobs, AI automation, and those are historically the jobs that the youth are getting. Like if you're going to start, you don't start come out of school and start as executive vice president. You're coming out of school and you're starting as the greeter, as as a admin assistant. I remember when people were coming out of school, they were getting these admin assistant roles and marketing assistant and assistant. But now there's so much automation. You're right, and there's a lot of upward pressure on organizations to they're not as profitable as they'd like to be. The inflation's up, expenses are up, sale revenues are shrinking. So yeah, they're making cuts. They're making cuts. They're not investing, and I guess the youth are at the brunt of it. They're feeling the brunt of it.
yeah, so we need to invest in the economy. We need to encourage startups. We need to encourage companies to expand, to grow. I think that's essential. That's the only way out of it. That's the only way I see that we can get out of this mess. All right, is that if we can grow another Nortel, great. There's the how imagine how many jobs that can create.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting talking about the competitive side because I don't think most people really appreciate that. But you see it a lot. I see it firsthand in the tech space. And there's a funny little anecdote that happened here recently in the last couple of years where we have a provincial, what do you call it? Essentially a self-regulatory organization for engineers. It's called a PEGA. And what it regulates is essentially the ability to use the title engineer. And they had a massive fight with the tech space, with any technology company, because the technology companies were trying to hire software engineers. And the title almost universally, especially in the US, is software engineer. And the problem was is that essentially APEGA said to these companies, you're in contravention of our self-regulatory act. You're not paying dues to us. These people are not engineers. They're not allowed to use the word engineer. And so they changed it. And what they found was is they weren't actually able to hire the same type of people because they weren't able to advertise with the engineer name, with the job title. And that's irrespective of pay, all of that kind of stuff, just to get the conversation started. And I talked to a couple of people in the industry about it, and I didn't actually think it was that big of a deal, but one of these companies hires a lot of people, hundreds of people a year, and he said it was absolutely night and day. But that sort of, and they went to court over it, and I'm pretty sure they resolved to the point where they're enabled, they're allowed to now use that title locally as a software engineer. But there was tons of infighting and there was tons of politics and red tape and this and that. And it's interesting because you think of like what is a country's comparative advantage. So if we take Canada, but you could look at pretty much any other country. Europe is also going through a bit of a crisis in this respect. Like what are you actually really good at in order to attract people away from large jurisdictions like the US, right? Like there are things that you don't need to compete like for like, right? Like if they're going to be the salary champion, then let's not pretend that we're going to be the highest paying jurisdiction, right? What else can we offer? What else, like quality of life sitting in the bush right now might be something that people care about. I care about it. Am I willing to not take the top salary if I can have better quality of life, if I can live in somewhere that's, again, more affordable, safer, all this sort of stuff? Like, people care about other things. And I think as a country, this requires a lot of senior level policy decision making, but I think we need to have a better discussion around, like, what do we want to be good at? Like, what could we be good at? What is our comparative advantage to somewhere like the US? If it's not going to be salary, let's stop playing that game, right? Let's stop pretending that we need to jump through hoops in order to offer $500,000 US salaries if it's just not economically feasible. And more importantly, let's focus on cost of living. Let's reduce red tape. Let's lean into the stuff that we can be really good at, really world class at, so that the people that are interested in that come here and stay here and work here and develop amazing companies. Like, I would be really curious to talk to the founding team of Shopify and say, what kept you here? Because, to be fair, like, they've chosen to stay here. They're a world leading company. What is it that kept them here versus Silicon Valley or New York or London or whatever? And I would almost guarantee you it's not funding, it's not pay, like, it's other things. So that obviously makes a difference to people, and we need to have that conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Kyle. I think having it's not all about the salary, because the salary can only go so far, but it's like the safety, the cost of living, the comfort, the ability to raise a family, because it's really difficult in San Francisco. If you've been there, it's a bit of a mess over there. So a lot of tech workers that I've spoken to, they've lasted maybe 2 years, 3 years, or even 4 years, and then they had to leave. Some came back to Canada, and I asked them why, and exactly the reason you've said, Kyle, is the safety, the ability to afford a home, to raise a family. So we really need to have that conversation. And I agree with you, and you said it very well there. It's we have to attract them with other things other than salary, because we cannot compete, and have these individuals contribute to the economy.
Yeah.
It's good. That's good, guys. And before we dive into another topic, maybe we should let Kyle get into the trails there. I bet she's just dying in the trails. I know I
Yeah,
am.
it's getting busy. People have the same idea I do.
I see everyone
I
coming by waving at you.
yeah. So I wanted to bring up something quickly that's unique to Canada, and maybe a bit of a PSA for some of the listeners that are small business owners. I'm sure they're going through it as well, but I had to navigate the recent changes to the de minimis rule and essentially declaring and paying customs in Canada. And so what I'm most surprised by is this has really nothing to do with Canadian legislation or politics. This is entirely a trading partner, the US, saying, hey guys, like, we're not going to we're not going to allow an exemption for a minimum amount of goods. So they've essentially scrapped that. So the first dollar of every good has to be declared. And most importantly, it has to be prepaid. The duty or tax has to be prepaid by the shipper. So I went through this, I jumped through a couple hoops to send a registered letter to the US recently. And it's an incredibly cumbersome process. But most importantly, the US are imposing duties, as we've known, on foreign made goods. So essentially, if there's a Canadian company that makes t-shirts, they import them from somewhere like China. In order for them to sell them to the US, if they sell, let's say, $100 worth of shirts, they have to prepay the 35% duty in order to ship them to the US. So they have to be able to recover that. So they're selling, essentially, their goods are going to be 35% more than they were last month. It started September 1st. And secondly, they have to have the cash flow. Ideally, they're getting prepayment, but if they're not, they have to have the cash flow in order to actually pay that duty, prepay that duty before it ships. So I'm curious your guys' thoughts on this. I think it's going to be huge for small business. Like, I can think of a half a dozen companies that we support locally, like they make soaps or whatever, like that they sell a lot. Again, Canadian provinces, our number one trading partner consistently across the board is the US. and that applies to small business, medium business, large business. So I think it's going to have a pretty significant impact, especially on the consumer sector, where they're just not going to get the revenue. The people are going to say either it's too expensive, or they're going to say, hey, our costs are 20% more, 10% more because of this additional step and this workflow that we need to go through. I think it's going to be really, really hard. So what do you guys think?
So who has to pay the duties? The Canadian individual prepay the duties, the Canadian entity that's shipping it to the US?
The exporter, yes. And just to clarify, this applies to a bunch of countries. So I've heard some commentary around it in Europe as well, where essentially there are larger companies, larger entities, where they have come out and said, we will stop selling to the US because this is so much it is so much more costly to our customers, and it is so much of an administrative burden that we're not even going to pretend that we can do it.
Yeah,
and so
Go ahead.
Yeah, the exporter pays.
Yeah, so they're obviously going to bake that into your cost. That's what you're saying. They're not going to just prepay that in hopes of they're going to bake that additional duty into their cost, and now you're seeing that's reflecting on the purchaser. They're going to stop. You're going to see a major slowdown in shipping into the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely massive. I think it's going to be.
How could you not?
Yeah. Well, I think in a perfect world, if I were an exporter, I would try and find a local way of sourcing those goods if possible. Now, it's definitely going to be more than production out of Asia, but is it 35% more? I doubt it. Even stuff like parts, like we especially in Ontario, we have a huge supply industry, especially in automotive. There are some absolutely world-class part manufacturers and essentially assembly companies. So they will send components back and forth and pre-assemble them, and then it'll get sent to the OEMs for final assembly. And I'm pretty sure that those customs are those duties are exempt for certain industries like auto. But what about other industries where there's a lot of mechanization, I don't know, mining, drilling, stuff like that? I can see it just absolutely decimating revenues for small, medium businesses.
Well, this is achieving exactly what our friend DJ Trump, Mr. DJ Trump, wants to achieve, is slowing down imports into his country and really boosting the domestic production of product. So yeah, this achieves exactly that. It's horrible for countries and exporters that are selling into the U.S., but it sounds like it may also be bad for Americans because now they have. We talked about this on an earlier podcast. They have less choice or higher cost of goods because now instead of getting it for Canada for cents on the dollar, now they have to pay 30 cents on the dollar to get it from a domestic supplier. But it's going to do exactly what Trump has set out to do from the very beginning. It's going to be some short-term pain, but it sounds like he's slowly forcing any kind of importation. He's just putting the squeeze on importation, our exportation, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's doing exactly what he said he was going to do.
It's interesting. I guess he's trying to curb people going around the tariffs, and going through other countries and things like that as well. But it's essentially unwinding all the effort for globalization. He's just bringing it back, bringing those manufacturing jobs back. I don't know how it's going to be, to be honest with you. I don't know if it's actually bringing manufacturing back into the U.S. if it's really going to help their economy, but it could. But I just don't think the individuals, the citizens, are ready to go work in the factories again. So it's quite interesting what he's trying to accomplish here. And with automation and everything, I don't know what's going to happen. But it looks like Kyle's already on the trails.